So the story I'm telling today for the August episode of The Third Doll is a folk tale from Pakistan, and it is titled Diamond Cut Diamond. So once upon a time, very long time ago, in the mountains of Pakistan, lived a poor merchant. And he had this small little store where he sold his goods and he did some trading. And this merchant, he spent day and night working. He worked very hard. He spent all his time doing business. But as much time as he spent and as hard as he worked, he was still poor. He just could not make ends meet. So one day he decides that he is going to try his luck in a big city. So he says goodbye to his family, packs a few of his things, and goes off into the big city, travels all the way to the big city to try his luck. Now, being such a hardworking person, there is no doubt that when he gets to the city, his luck changes and he starts amassing wealth. And he becomes wealthier and wealthier. And as the days go by and the years go by, he is living a very comfortable, very wealthy life. But as his days are coming to a point where he knows that he's getting older, he starts missing his family and where he had grown up. And he decides that it is time for me to rest and to be with my family. And it is time for me to go back home. So he sells his business and he sells all his property. And with all the money that he makes from that, he buys gold and gems because he feels that those would be easier for him to travel with. And now the day comes for him to travel back to his home up in the mountains. But he knows that the road and the way from the city all the way up into the mountains where his family still is that there are bandits and people on the highways that hold up and rob the travelers. So he decides to, instead of being dressed up in his now usual very the clothes that are a symbol of his wealth, he decides to put on his old clothes, the clothes that he had come in, very poor, had come in into the city. And he puts those old clothes, ragged clothes on, pretending like he's a poor man. And he puts all his wealth, his jewels and the gold coins that he's bought into a box. And he locks the box and he hides it in his clothes. And he takes off on his travel and back into the mountains to be with his family. And he makes it all the way to this town, which is just a few villages away from where he is going. And when he gets to this town, in the center of the town is this big market. The whole lane on both sides has these shops and stores, and they have these wide open fronts, and they are laden with all kinds of objects that you could want: silks and satins and carpets and jewelry and different kinds of spices. And this old merchant, he comes to this town and he sees this market. He thinks, you know, I left my village as a poor man, and I went into the city to find wealth and luck. And now I'm returning. And it's kind of odd that I should return as a poor man. And I want to return as who I am now. And I'm so close to home that I don't think I'm going to meet any thieves or robbers on the way. So as he's going through the town, he starts buying things to bring for his family and gifts for his family. And then he decides that he needs to change his outfit and get some nice silk and satin robes. And at the end of that main road of the bazaar, he comes to this store. where the storekeeper is sitting on a stool and he is dressed in the most amazing satin robes, and he's smoking a silver pipe. And this old merchant, he goes up into the store and he starts looking at the things to buy. And first, the storekeeper looks at him very suspiciously that how is this man who is dressed so poorly going to afford anything? But then something strikes him and he starts doing business with him. And sure enough, at the end of it, the old merchant takes out some gold coins and pays for it. Now, the storekeeper realizes that this merchant is not everything that meets the eye. So he invites him in for tea and he starts talking to him. And he says, where are you going? Where are you coming from? And they start chatting. And the old merchant is very naive and starts telling him his story and about how he went into the city and he made all this money and now how he's coming back to his old village, a wealthy man, and how he has all his wealth in this little box. And the shopkeeper, who is very cunning and very shrewd, tells the old merchant, you know, there are a lot of robbers on the way from this town to your village. You should be careful. Now, hearing this, the old merchant thinks, oh my gosh, I've traveled all this way without encountering any thieves or robbers. It would be so sad that from here, only a few villages, I would lose everything I've spent my whole life making. So he tells the shopkeeper and he says, Lalaji, which is dear sir, like in a respectful way. He says, Lalaji, can you please keep this little box for me just for a few days till I go to my village, and I'll come back in a few days with some of my nephews and neighbors, you know, strong men who can escort me back. And the shopkeeper says, no, that's not my business. That's not what I do. I'm a shopkeeper. I sell satins and silks and robes. I'm not a bank. But the merchant now feels like, okay, I've already told this person about my wealth, and the shops are so close to each other that I'm sure these other shopkeepers have heard too. So he's really nervous, and he pleads with the shopkeeper, and he says, Lalaji, please, as a favor to me, I know you don't know me, but please, as a favor to me, would you please just keep my box in safekeeping? I will be back in just a few days. And after much insistence, the shopkeeper agrees and takes the box and locks it in his safe. And then the old merchant leaves. But as he leaves, he wonders if he did the right thing. And he doesn't even know the shopkeeper. He's never met him. So as he's walking back through the market, he decides to stop at some of the other shops and ask about Lalaji, the shopkeeper. Now, again, the merchant doesn't know that if that shopkeeper is the biggest swindler, these other shopkeepers are pretty much swindlers as well. And every shop that he stops at to ask about the reputation of the shopkeeper where he had left his wealth, they all figure, well, they might get some benefit from swindling this man. And they sing high praises of the shopkeeper. And they say, oh, Lalaji, he's the most trustworthy person you would ever meet. So feeling a little better, the old merchant leaves and he travels to his village. A few days later, he returns to that town with a few of his nephews and a few of other young men, strong big men, to escort him back to the village with the box. And he tells the young man to wait at the tea shop and says, you wait here while I go get my box. And he goes back into the town, into the market, and he walks all the way down the street to the last shop where he had left his little box of wealth. And he enters the shop and he greets the shopkeeper and says, Lala ji, how are you? I hope you're having a good day. And the shopkeeper just ignores him. And the old merchant addresses him again and says, Lala ji, I hope you're doing well. I'm here to get my box. And the shopkeeper still ignores him. And the merchant says, Lala ji, have I offended you? Do you not recognize me? I'm the person who had left the box with you a few days ago. And the shopkeeper gets up in much rage and says, recognize you? Of course I don't recognize you. I hardly have time to recognize my paying customers who buy all the silks and satins for me. How would I recognize a beggar like you? Get out of my store. And the merchant is shocked and he insists and he says, Lala ji, you have to remember me. And hearing the commotion, a couple of the other shopkeepers come to Lala ji's store and they grab the merchant and they throw him out of the store. And the poor merchant, he is in shock. He lifts himself up and crawls to the wall that is next to the Lala ji's store. And he just sits there in shock, unable to move. And his nephews and those young men waiting at this tea store for a while think that maybe maybe the merchant just left, and they leave without him and go back to their village. And when night falls, a young man and his friend are passing by and going through the town and passing by that wall, and they're going to a party and they see this old merchant sitting by the wall. And this young man says to a friend, this must be a thief sitting right here so late at night. And then his friend says, I don't think even a thief would be just sitting by a wall, even if it's just late at night, like just, out in the open. And they laugh and they walk away. And when in the early morning hours, the young man is returning from the party and he sees the old merchant still sitting near the wall, unmoving, like still in shock. And he goes up to the merchant and he says, my friend, what's wrong? Are you ill? Are you sick? And the old merchant says, yes, I am so sick and I have this illness to which there is no cure. And the young man says, no, there's no such thing. Come along, come with me. And he lifts the old merchant and he brings him to his home. Now, this young man is very wealthy. He has been, he has inherited a lot of wealth and has no idea what to do with it. And he is very kind, he's very generous, and he happily gives away his wealth to any cause that comes his way. And most times he himself is his cause. But this time he sees this old merchant and he asks him, and he brings him home and he makes him comfortable and he gives him something to drink and he feeds him. And then once the merchant is comfortable, he asks him and he says, what's ailing you? What's going on? And the merchant explains to him what had happened and how he got robbed by the shopkeeper. And the young man laughs and says, everybody in this town knows that he is the biggest swindler in this town. So don't feel bad that you got swindled by him. He is not a nice man, but you are my friend and you can stay here with me in my home for as long as you like until you feel better and you've recovered your health. So the old merchant now is staying with this young man as his guest, but he's still very upset and doesn't know what to do. And one day he's in his room late at night and he hears in the other room this young man and all his friends are over and they're laughing and they're really enjoying. And the old merchant thinks to himself and wonders if he will ever laugh again and if he will ever have joy in his heart again. And the next day, the young man comes to the old merchant and says, "Do you remember the wall where I found you a few days ago?" And the old merchant says, "Of course, how can I ever forget that place?" And the young man says, "Okay, what I want you to do is today in the afternoon, I want you to go back to that wall and wait there. Then when you get a sign, you will get a sign and you will know what it is. When you get that sign, I want you to go to that shopkeeper and say to him, 'Lala ji, would you please give me back my box that I gave to you in trust?'" And the old merchant says, "What will that do? I've already said that. I've already begged, and he just threw me out." And the young man says, "Don't worry, just do as I say. When you see a sign, go up to the shopkeeper and say, 'Lala ji, may I please have the box that I gave you in trust?'" And the old merchant figures, what have I to lose? So that afternoon, he walks back into town and he walks through the market to the end of the market, and he stands right by the wall. And the shopkeeper sees him, but just ignores him. And the old merchant is standing by the wall and he's about to leave. He's like, you know, it's been a little while. And just as he's about to give up and leave, he sees this parade of a palki, most gorgeous palki, with silk and satin curtains and just adorned with gold etchings, and being carried by 4 palki bearers wearing silk uniforms. And it's coming down, and next to it is this attendant, very solemn man. And behind the attendant is a servant who's carrying a big box on his head. And this parade of palki and attendant and servant come and stop right outside the shopkeeper's store. And the shopkeeper, seeing this beautiful palki, knows that this has to belong to a woman of some means, comes running out of his store, and he addresses the attendant and he says, "What can I do for you, sir? What can I do for this lady? How can I be of assistance?" And the attendant says to the shopkeeper, "Well, this is my cousin and she is traveling back home, but her husband has been called away on business, so he can't travel with her. And she is carrying all her jewelry, and we are afraid that she will get robbed." And with that, the attendant signals to the servant, and the servant brings the box, big box, and the attendant opens it. And when he opens it, Lalaji's eyes just become so wide, because in the box is gold and pearls and jewels that you cannot imagine. And Lalaji, who is a swindler, says, "Well, whatever I can do to assist. It is not my job, but I am happy to help this woman, this lady who is in such distress. If you like, I can keep your box in trust." And as soon as he says that, the old merchant sees a hand coming out from the curtains of the palki on the other side of the shop where the shopkeeper is, and signaling him to come forward. And the merchant thinks, could that be the signal? What is the signal? And as he's thinking, the hand motion becomes more impatient. So the old merchant figures, okay, this must be the signal. So he goes up to the shopkeeper, and as he was told, he says, "Lalaji, may I please have my box back that I gave to you in trust?" And now the shopkeeper thinks, I better give him his small box back before he makes a big fuss, and I lose all this jewels in this big box from this lady. So he says, of course, sure, let me go get it for you. And he goes in and he brings the small box of jewels from the old merchant, for the old merchant. And the old merchant takes the key which he has around his neck, and he opens the box quickly. And sure enough, all his gold and gold coins and jewels are in it. He quickly closes the box, locks it, runs into the street, and he can't believe his luck. And he's dancing with joy, and he's singing, and he's just dancing around. And as soon as that happens, a messenger comes running up the street, and he stops at the store and he tells the attendant, I just got news that the lady's husband's business is over and he can now travel with this lady. And with that, the attendant closes the box, locks it, gives it back to the servant, who puts it back on his head. And as soon as that is done, the curtains of the palki open, and out jumps the young man, the young friend, and he too starts dancing in the street, and singing and dancing with the old merchant. And the shopkeeper just is standing at the steps of his shop in shock, not knowing what had just hit him. And soon he too starts laughing, and he is laughing so hard, and he too runs into the street, and he starts dancing with the merchant and the young man. And the attendant who sees this is really surprised. And this attendant, who's really the young man's friend, comes up to the shopkeeper and he says, you know, I understand why this old merchant is dancing. He just got back his life savings. And I know why this young man is laughing and dancing in the street, because he just played a trick on you. But I don't understand, like, why are you dancing and singing in the street with them? And the shopkeeper laughs and says, I, in my life, have learned and played 13 different cons on people. And today, I got conned. So I hope you enjoyed this story as much as I did.